Every year, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists sets a clock, which is called the Doomsday Clock. They set it first in 1947, immediately after the first atom bomb. When the clock reaches midnight, it's termination. And the clock has moved up and back over the years. Last January, they moved it 2 minutes closer to midnight, 3 minutes to midnight. One reason is the increasing threat of nuclear war. The other is the impending disaster of environmental catastrophe. So that's a measure of where our civilization is. 3 minutes to midnight. Closest it's been in 30 years when there was a major war scare.
There's a fantastic quote from Joseph Campbell. "We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. For the labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path, and where we had thought to find an abomination, we will find a god. Where we had thought to slay another, we will slay ourselves. And where we had thought to travel outwards, we would come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world." When I made the first Mad Max, I was more interested in the personal story, the response of somebody caught up in a chaotic world, basically seeing the death of his family and dealing with what we now call post-traumatic stress. In those days, even though I was a doctor, there was no such description of that condition, even though we're aware that when people undergo tremendous trauma or stress or witness it, that it does affect them. We know that from soldiers from the various wars that came back and so on. So I was very interested in that and telling basically a revenge tale.
You start with Max being incredibly young and quite innocent. He has still the notion that happiness is possible, that his wife and his child complete him, you know? And then when everything is taken away from him, his best friend, his wife, his kid, he becomes a hollow man. There's a moment, a beautiful moment on the first movie, on the Mad Max movie, where Max is walking down the dark garage and it dissolves to the car coming out. Max becomes the car. Now he's one with the car. He's not two separate entities. And I think that's a very symbolic moment in the Mad Max mythology, because the man is the car and the car is the man. And from that moment on, they become like Sir Lancelot and his armor, you know, or a knight and his armor.
Max carries a code with him in the first film that I think most normal men would carry. You know, the desire to keep the family safe, you know, have a decent civil society where people don't go around killing each other and so on. That's a code that he's got, but he's living in a world where things have crumbled so much that that code no longer works for people. And people are having to resort to becoming scavengers, having to resort to becoming brutal. And in a way, I mean, that kind of situation is a universal one throughout history. Any situation where there's war, gang violence and so on, how does an average man keep his moral code in a situation where everybody else is against that code? It's a tough situation to be in, and a lot of people fail to keep that code and end up switching over to a brutal way of living. For me, Mad Max is a very tragic character. In the first movie, you know, he's got his humanity intact. He's got a wife, he's got a son, and he sort of believes in his job, although he struggles with that a little bit throughout the film. And then you get the tragic ending, and he loses the family. And what I love about the second film is it really picks up from where Max was at in the first film and continues with it. And although it takes him into a very different scenario and it jumps ahead by a few years, the continuation of the character itself was absolutely spot on. The leg still hasn't healed, which is almost like a metaphor for the fact that he hasn't healed emotionally. He's so damaged from the experience he's had in the past, the emotional loss of family and so on, that he can't recover from it. And he's decided to resign himself to the life of a lone dog, while other people around him seem to be able to overcome those traumas and reconnect with other people, whether it's good guys or bad guys. For me, that's the centre of who Max is. He actually gets called a scavenger by Papagallo. You know, a scavenger lives off the bodies of the dead. He takes the musical toy from a dead body that's decaying. You know, he might as well be plucking away with his beak. Definitely a facet of his character.
It was when the movie was shown around the world, we realized that somehow we tapped into a pretty universal archetype, a lone wanderer in a wasteland searching for some sort of meaning. When it was seen in Japan, Max was seen as some sort of lone samurai. In France, Mad Max movies were seen as westerns on wheels. In Scandinavia, again, lone warriors wandering a wasteland in search of meaning. He's not quite a fully resolved hero. He's always unresolved. In a sense, he's the reluctant hero, gets caught up in people's story. He's afraid of his humanity. He feels that somehow if he engages with other human beings, he's always going to lose them in some way. Is probably doomed to do that until the end of his days. And that's why I think at the end of the story, he has to leave in some way.
.どちらかというとキャンベルの、古典的なそのヒーローっていうかその旅立ちがあって成長があって、帰還してっていうその工程で特殊な能力を得て成長したキャラクターがそれ以降ですね、ヒーローっていうのはその時代とともに変わっていくと思うんですけども、昔のヒーローはエリートですごく特殊な能力を持っていてその能力を持って英雄を成してたんですけども、マッドマックスに関してはちょっと違うんですよね。そういうキャラクターであったとしてもマックスであれば家族を殺されたりあることがあって過去にとどまっていると。その特殊な能力を持ちながらも未来に歩むことを止めてしまっているっていうキャラクターでそこがダークな世界というかエンジンが止まった昔ブイブイ言わしてたスーパーカーみたいなもんですよね。抜け殻になってしまったんで動かないので周りに押されたりしながらも動いてる間に例えば今回の新しいマッドマックスでいうとフリオサがエンジンになって動き出して昔の自分を思い出して初めてハンドルを握って前に進むことを思い出したっていう感じです。
It's okay. Sleep. Get some rest.
Ce qu'on appelle le héros campbellien, en fait, c'est une tentative de synthèse de milliers de héros qui vont des tribus aux grandes civilisations à travers l'histoire. C'est pas tellement un personnage spécifique qu'un cycle d'aventures. C'est ce qu'on appelle donc le cycle du héros, le monomythe, qu'on va retrouver plus ou moins dans n'importe quel récit héroïque qui a survécu au temps. Et donc Campbell s'est posé la question de savoir pourquoi on retrouvait ces étapes aussi fréquemment, pour découvrir que tout simplement elles avaient un sens. Quand on nous raconte une histoire, en fait c'est nous, l'auditeur, qui faisons vivre les personnages de cette histoire. Et chaque personnage que va rencontrer le héros dans le récit fait appel à une partie de notre personnalité à nous. Dans la tradition du récit, celui qui raconte l'histoire donne à son auditoire les moyens de faire bouger quelque chose à l'intérieur de lui. Écouter et vivre intensément une grande aventure héroïque, c'est presque un exercice de méditation transcendantale. La saga Mad Max, elle ne suit pas aveuglément le cycle du monomythe comme un George Lucas a pu le faire, par exemple, pour les Star Wars. Il faut les prendre de façon moins littérale qu'elles ne le sont dans un Star Wars ou dans un Seigneur des Anneaux. L'appel de l'aventure ou le refus de l'appel, chez Luke Skywalker, il n'y a pas besoin de dire tout le monde sait où est l'appel et où est le refus de l'appel. Mais le refus de l'appel dans un Mad Max, en l'occurrence dans Mad Max 2, c'est tout simplement quand il décide de repartir avec toute l'essence qu'il a pu récupérer. En fait, il a refusé l'appel. C'est-à-dire que le spectateur attend de lui qu'il se comporte en héros et qu'il réponde à l'appel que lui envoie la tribu de Papagalo, et il refuse. Et en refusant, il déclenche des forces qui vont, d'une certaine façon, l'obliger à vraiment partir à l'aventure, c'est-à-dire à revenir vers cette tribu et à faire ce qu'on attend de lui.
It's all the same to you. I'll drive that tanker.
I think that at the end of the day, Miller loves to talk about hope and the possibility of hope as a horizon for the characters. So on the second one, Max is a shell of a man. He has given up hope. He is completely hardened and sort of a walking corpse. You know, he has no affection, he has no emotion. And at the end of it all, he smiles again. It's very poignant that Gibson's performance is calibrated beautifully for that final moment in which he realizes that the fuel is not there in the tankers, but hope is the important thing.
Fury Road is virtually an extended chase in which you're picking up as much of the story, the characters, the interaction of the characters, and the notion of the world on the run, as it were. And that what was being in conflict was to be human, the 5 wives. And of course, they needed a female road warrior. They couldn't have a male road warrior because that's such a different story. You know, man stealing for the 5 wives of a tyrant. So we needed a Furiosa. And then following through her story, it becomes a story that is about the power of the female.
In the fourth movie, I thought with the Furiosa character, they were trying to create a female character who would have the best traits of Max, the toughness, the intelligence, but would also not be a scavenger. It's almost like Furiosa character is who we would have liked Max to have become.
George Miller uses the female figure in a way that is very potent and is not idealized. All his women, the first Max or Fury Road, they're very, very strong female characters. The Furiosa is post-punk, is really a fully fledged hero because in a strange way for me, Furiosa becomes Max. She is the real Mad Max, in my view, not so much Hardy, but her.
It's me.
He sees them as a more elevated form of humanity. But I think that he uses them as that, as an optimization of mankind, but he also uses them as a source of life. In Thunderdome, he seems to be fascinated by Auntie, by Tina Turner, because I don't think he really believes she's the villain. I think Miller is sort of in awe and in love with Tina Turner in that movie and cannot quite make her the villain. He likes her too much. Tina Turner looks almost like a disco queen, you know, she looks glamorous.
Le personnage de Mad Max, il surplombe un peu les récits qu'il traverse, de la même façon qu'un dieu surplomberait un récit. Et je pense que Max doit en partie son identité à des dieux nordiques, en l'occurrence le dieu Odin, qui, comme Max, perd un œil. C'est une incarnation de la justice, d'une justice tranchante, radicale,
The warriors with one arm or one eye, the missing piece makes them more formidable. So there's a mythic quality to her.
It's often the female disposition, which is more healing and more affiliative and more nurturing. And I'm not really talking about masculinity or femininity. I'm talking about the approach. If the male approach is to attack something front on, usually leads to an escalating conflict that really ends up in chaos. And by female, it's that notion of sort of surfing power. If you look at the great political leaders, the Mandelas and the Mahatma Gandhis, they are more female in approach. If you look at the tyrannical figures that go out there and tack something front on, they might endure for a while, but they end up forcing such contrary forces that they're destroyed fairly quickly. And we see that throughout history. There's just no question about that.
Max. My name is Max.
The Humongous seems to represent every brutal, tyrannical, colossal leader throughout history that's ever existed, all just rolled into one. Genghis Khan and Ivan the Terrible, they're all rolled into one. Humanity is suppressed by the face being covered up, and the rest of the body is just this mean fighting machine full of muscle. And he's got Nazi memorabilia in his briefcase, and the vehicles of the bad guys are covered in symbols of skull and bones. And, you know, there's all kinds of historical totalitarianism symbols from different regimes are mixed in with the bad guys in the second film and in the fourth film as well. Other characters like, say, Wes could never be a leader. He's too crazy. So he's just the sort of attack dog that gets sent out by the Humongous. And, you know, we get a lot of characters like that throughout real history as well. Every insane, tyrannical leader needs a series of characters like West to go out and carry out the brutal acts for them. The eternal struggle that Max is stuck in, and that all the other good characters in the movies are stuck in, is the one against totalitarianism. Dictators who want to seize all the resources and make resources scarce and turn us against each other. Kind of irony in the fourth film, in that all of these vehicles and weapons are continuously manufactured, even though it would actually take a much more complex and sophisticated society to be able to create those weapons and maintain those vehicles. The manufacturing of tools for killing is prioritized over the manufacture of food and medicines and so on. That matches up with real life as well. I mean, military budgets and intelligence agency budgets around the world are sky high, and we've got countries full of people who are starving. It's an eternal struggle that we're all mixed up in, and maybe that's what the big appeal of the Max character is that he represents somebody who can fight back against that.
People are almost inevitably corrupted by power, and we see that throughout all of history. It's very, very hard to gain power and use it in a creative sense. It's very, very easy to gain power and use it destructively. That's the most common scenario. It's just the nature of it, I think. I think it's so difficult to hold on to power, because ultimately the powerful person is human and very, very flawed. You see that in corporations, you see that politically, you see it in every walk of life.
It's not accidental that the Toe Cutter plays Immortan Joe. I think it's completely instinctive at the very least, but it's instinctive creation to say this is the ultimate evolution of the bad guy, because whereas Immortan Joe, Toe Cutter, or the Humongous are really basically pure male negative energy. Miller believes that's the evolution of Toe Cutter into Immortan Joe. The very meaning of the word immortal, which becomes Immortan, means Toe Cutter never died. He just transformed. He transformed into a monster in Humongous and into the sort of Norse mythology god version of himself with Immortan Joe.
Stop the rig! Return my treasures to me, and I myself will carry you to the gates of Valhalla.
Basically what we said in this story is, imagine that all the bad things you see in the news all come to pass. Let's talk about environmental damage. Let's talk about nuclear accidents or nuclear skirmish somewhere with devices, intense climate change. Let's take all the things we see with power grids going down, with economic collapse, all of that somehow happening and then jumping 45, 50 years into the future.
일단 포스트 아포칼립스는 멸망에 대해서 다루고 있다는 거예요. 그래서 라는 장르에 대해서 제가 가지고 있는 생각은 인류 문명이 탄생하는 무렵부터 갖고 있던 선과 악이 싸우고 있고 그 결과로 인간은 끝장이 날 것이다라는 그런 세계관을 다루고 있다는 거죠. 그러니까 매드맥스나 대표적인 포스트 아포칼립스 작품들은 그러니까 예를 들면 북두신권 같은 작품들을 보면은 선과 악에 대한 도덕에 대해서 다루고 있다기보다는 개인에 대해서 다루고 있다고 생각해요. 그러니까 즉 그 개인이라는 거는 좆된 인간이죠. 좆된 인간을 다루고 있다. 그러니까 즉 인류의 문명의 시작부터 시작된 구대륙의 문명에서 시작된 그것은 개인의 이야기고, 그 개인은 말하자면 좆된 개인이고, 그 좆된 개인은 영웅인 거죠. 좆된 영웅.
For hundreds of years, Europe was the most savage place in the world. Europeans were dedicated to slaughtering each other. The 30 Years' War, for example, 17th century, killed maybe a third of the population of Germany. It culminated in the Second World War. Since then, Europe has been peaceful. And I think the main reason is that Europeans finally understood that the next time they play the game of slaughtering each other will be the end. Same is true of increasing threat of nuclear war, which would destroy anything they could call civilization. Einstein was once asked what weapons he thought would be used in the next war. He didn't know, but he said that the war after that would be fought with stone axes. That's about where we are. Civilization has created means of destruction so extreme that any conflict between major powers is essentially terminal. We're marching towards a precipice in which we may destroy not only existing civilizations, but even the prospects for decent human survival, not in the very distant future. If that happens, if we don't reverse it in time, there's some time, not a lot, but then there won't be any civilization to talk about. I mean, humans have developed the capacity to destroy themselves. That was demonstrated in August 1945 and since. They have not developed the capacity to control their ability to destroy themselves. What's happened in Europe in the past generation, couple of generations, demonstrates that it is at least possible for advanced societies to stop slaughtering each other. Unfortunately, such conflicts are brewing and getting worse.
Well, I think that the world doesn't get killed at once. I think the world dies very slowly. In our present times, the end of the world becomes a fantasy of a clean end and a clean beginning. In reality, we will not get a big end of the world. Things are going to start to deteriorate and crumble slowly. We can see it now in the media. We can see it in our politics, in our way of thinking. You know, the movements are very, very subtle, but constant. In the same way, the world is transforming morally, politically, towards a certain decay. You know, we are depleting the water very slowly. I don't think it's gonna be as poetic as Immortan Joe. I think it's gonna be far less interesting than that. The one thing that I do think is gonna kill the world, or two things rather, are greed and stupidity. I think those are the two things that are gonna kill our world, our greed and our stupidity.